So I've been looking at a lot of groundwater issues, and in this particular video, we're going to look at groundwater hazards in the form of karst. So what exactly is karst? So karst, it's defined as a landscape shaped by the dissolving power of groundwater. This is a really famous example of karst from China. This is all limestone. Now this at one point was one big solid layer of rock. But over time, as water has seeped in, it's able to dissolve little bits of the calcite that are in the limestone. And what we have left are these like little spires sticking up, which is pretty neat. So what rocks do dissolve? There's very specific minerals that dissolve really, really easily. And the biggest one we'll probably talk about the most is the mineral calcite. So calcite is a really common mineral. It's calcium carbonate. It's the exact same thing that seashells are made out of. And so calcite is a really common rock at or mineral at the surface. And it's the major mineral in the rock limestone. And I've already mentioned limestone once already. So limestones form at the bottom of a shallow ocean. Remember how there's a lot of calcite in seashells? There's a very good reason. So the GIF you see here, I actually made this myself. It's a part of a video that I took. That's actually a calcite crystal that I dropped into vinegar. So vinegar is an acid. So calcite likes a little bit of acid to help it dissolve. It's actually found naturally in our natural water cycle system. The acid that's most common is carbonic acid. And carbonic acid forms in the atmosphere. It's a reaction between water vapor in the atmosphere and carbon dioxide, and it creates H2CO3. Now, it's not a very strong acid. We're not talking acid rain. But rain itself is actually very slightly acidic because of that carbonic acid. And it's just enough to start to dissolve that limestone out just a little bit. And so calcite's, like I said, a big mineral in limestone. It's also one of the major minerals in the rock marble. Marble's a metamorphic rock. The mineral gypsum also dissolves pretty easily in water. Gypsum, you're probably actually surrounded by it right now because that's what drywall is composed of. It's that chalky stuff in your walls. That's a mineral called gypsum. Now on the right, this is a GIF of halite dissolving. So that's just a chunk of salt that somebody tossed in a beaker of water and set a timer. And this is a time lapse of that over about a 30-minute span, but you can see how it's kind of slowly dissolving and going away. There's also a rock called dolomite. It's very similar to limestone, but you may have heard of the Dolomite Mountains in Italy that the rock is actually named after. And so that's another rock that's going to dissolve pretty easily. So these are all places you can expect karst types of environments. So if we look in the US, the places that have karst, you can definitely see kind of big areas dotted with it. Not a lot in southern Arizona, a little bit up on the rim, up in the Colorado Plateau area. There is a band in sort of western Texas going up into New Mexico, and that's where Carlsbad Cavern is. On through Texas, Texas has a lot of big show caves, which is pretty cool. But you can also see those areas that we equate with caves and caverns throughout the United States are the places we can see this. And then there's Florida, which is pretty much one giant sinkhole at this point. But the entire state of Florida is legit limestone, which is why it forms sinkholes so well there. So here's a beautiful example of some karst. This is inside one of those cave systems. And so the big hole in the ground is actually a result of that limestone being dissolved away slowly. Now, what happens is, so you get water underground that forms a cave, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but as that cave gets bigger and bigger and bigger, the roof of it gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and eventually it collapses in. And so this is a collapsed sinkhole, but it's a pretty common one. And I think this is the one we normally think about in terms of it. Now, sinkholes tend to be nice and round, and that's because caves tend to have a big amphitheater shape. They're domed on top just because that's a particularly structurally resistant type of geometric shape. I'm totally distracted watching these two, so hopefully you're still listening because I'm watching them as well. Now, I don't remember all of these are. A lot of them are China. The trees on the right, that's actually in Louisiana just a few years ago in a place called Bayou Corn, where a sinkhole actually developed under the lake and then the whole lake drained away. Which is kind of pretty scary. That was caused in part because of drilling for gas and oil. And beneath this area, they actually they ended up hitting a pocket of salt underground and dissolved all the salt away, which is what caused the sinkhole. The top left one is it's a security camera footage from a Corvette museum. And a sinkhole formed right under all of these collector and somewhat priceless cars. And they fell in. They were actually able to dig them out, and they were trashed, and they are on display in their current trashed condition right now in the museum, which is sort of funny. So I got lots of examples of sinkholes here. What you're going to find is a lot of them are very round, which is pretty cool. So this is a sinkhole that formed in Germany. This is an interesting event that happened in Florida. This was in 1981, 83. And so this big sinkhole collapsed. It took down an import car dealership, and it swallowed like 6 Porsche out of there. They actually, I think you can see the blue one sort of at the very top left-ish part of the sinkhole picture. That blue Porsche, they actually went in with a crane and pulled it out. And the owner of the car said that actually pulling it out did more damage than the sinkhole itself. It had scrapes and bruises and a bent fender because of the sinkhole. But because they lifted it up with the crane with straps underneath it, it actually it bent the frame of the car, so it made quite a mess. You can see pictures of a house falling in over on the right. What I understand is this turned into like a big kind of party. People would show up as like tourists to come and look at it, which is kind of ridiculous, and they sell like t-shirts. This was before the internet. We were much more bored back then, apparently, or I guess more easily entertained. I'm trying to switch. There we go. So what ended up happening is the water table. So over time, it actually filled up with water. And then they named it Lake Rose. My understanding is it was named after a woman who lost her house that was near there. And so this is a view of it from a hiking trail. I legit got this exact view from Google Earth using the Street View. And so if you would like to go hike around the sinkhole filled with water now, it's there if you ever visit. Now, of course, some things are kind of funny, but oftentimes these sinkholes can turn tragic as well. So this is a home in Seffner, Florida. I believe that is over on the western side of the Panhandle. On the evening of February 28th, 2013, the Bush family was in bed for the night. It was Jeremy Bush, his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, plus a couple other folks, and his brother Jeff. And his brother Jeff had just moved in with them. They're going to bed for the night. Everything's nice and calm, and all of a sudden they hear this horrible noise, and Jeff starts yelling. I'm sorry. Yeah, Jeff starts yelling, and Jeremy goes running to go check on his brother, but unfortunately what's happened is a sinkhole actually opened up beneath the bedroom that Jeff Bush was using. Here's Jeff Bush. This is the picture everybody sort of sees of him. But on the left, this is when they started tearing the house down. Obviously, it's a particularly unstable area, so they had to do this very, very carefully. But you can see that's actually the hole that was under his bedroom. They sent a drone in to look initially in the building to see what was going on. And it's pretty wild because like in the bedroom, there's a hole in the floor, but like pictures still hanging up on the wall, which is kind of amazing. So Jeff runs in, or Jeremy, the brother who owned the home, he runs in and tries to save his brother, jumps down into the hole. When the cops showed up, they actually pulled him out because it was still sinking and they were afraid he would end up trapped in there as well. The hole itself ended up to be about 20 feet wide and 30 feet long and about 30 feet deep. Unfortunately, what happened is they were never actually able to find Jeff. Obviously, he died down in the sinkhole, but they were never able to recover his body just because of how unstable it was, and they couldn't see it anywhere from the top. Eventually, they tore the whole house down, and you can see, like, that's a pretty big hole kind of compared to the rest of the house. So this was in 2003. They covered it up, they filled it in, and then couple years later, the hole opened back up. And in this aerial view here, you can see where the Bush's house was. It is roped off with fencing. And just past that, kind of in the background of the image there was another home that was actually condemned and torn down because of the threat there. Now, out of all of this, it's not a happy kind of part of the story, but apparently Jeff had just moved in with his brother and his brother's family pretty soon right before this happened. And apparently that had been Jeremy's 2-year-old daughter's bedroom. So had Jeff not moved in, it probably would have been the little girl who was caught in the sinkhole. Now, Arizona has sinkholes too. Most of where it's going to happen is in the blue-colored rocks towards the northern part of the state. This is where we find a lot of limestone. If you can see the Grand Canyon running through there too. So these are some of the places we find a lot of limestones, therefore a lot of sinkholes and even some caves. Although if you look down, that same color of blue is sort of dotted throughout southern Arizona because we do have like Karst Caverns down in the southeastern part of the state, and Tucson's got some caves too. But by far and large, they're a little bit more concentrated up north. So up in the Colorado Plateau, some of the most famous sinkholes in Arizona are called the McCauley Sinks. These are just south of Winslow. So they're up on the northeastern part of the state. They run along the Little Colorado River, and that you can see in the picture on the right there. And what's kind of cool about this is you can actually see there's a pattern to that flow of water underground, and you can see how those sinkholes are all sort of aligned in kind of a sinuous shape there, and they're molding or kind of melding together over time as they get bigger and bigger, and that's going to end up forming what we call a solution valley over time, which is kind of cool. Now, one thing to notice, where's the water? There's no water in there. Why isn't there a lake like in Florida? Well, we've talked about how deep the water table is in Arizona. So it's just the water table is deep enough that the bottom of the sinkhole is above that, so it's not going to fill up with water at this point. Now, one that does have water in it is called Montezuma's Well. This is up in the Verde Valley. It's a pretty nice stop if you ever are heading north or south from the valley. It's just off of I-17. It's not very far. You can hike it. You can actually hike down into it and down to the edge of the water, which is beautiful. There are some Sinagwan ruins in there, which is pretty awesome. You can see there's a kind of an interpretive sign in the image of the cliff houses. You can also take a trail that takes you around to the outside of it and down kind of like to the bottom of the sinkhole, but on the outside, and you can see some natural springs where the water is actually flowing out of there, which is pretty cool. Sedona actually has a lot of really cool sinkholes, and I'm going to put this Google Slides document up for you on Canvas, and what you're going to be able to do at that point is you can actually click that link there, and it'll take you to this map, so you can actually zoom in and read about the different sinkholes and look at some pictures of them, which is kind of cool. One of the most famous ones there is the Devil's Kitchen sinkhole, and you can see the picture on the bottom is actually there was a big chunk that collapsed off. So some of these are actually still growing. Now, where these are growing from are actually pretty far underground that's causing the sinkhole. So you can see there's actually the Redwall limestone that's dissolving. There's also a little bit of dissolution in what's called the Martin dolomite. Remember, I mentioned dolomite earlier as one of the rocks that dissolve. So as the red wall's dissolving, that Supai sandstone and the Hermit Formation, those are actually collapsing in to there, which is kind of cool. So yeah, and you can go and hike out to most of these, which is pretty fun. Here's some international ones for you. This is sort of interesting. This happened in Guatemala City in 2007. Unfortunately, this actually killed 5 people because you can see the outline of the building. Apparently, that was an apartment building, and there were some people home when this formed. There's some views of this picture I've seen where it's just like black, where the sinkhole is, and it always makes me think of like the Bugs Bunny cartoons, where he takes like the black circle out and like throws it at the wall and it sticks and he's able to run into the tunnel. And it's just because it's that deep. And so you can see on the right this little diagram that's terribly blurry, apparently. Sorry. It's so deep that you could put 2 Statue of Liberties flame to flame in there, and it would barely stick out the very top of the hole. So that's pretty impressive. Now this one isn't a completely natural process. This is sort of human driven. Because of kind of poor infrastructure in Guatemala City. There's a lot of leaky pipes. It's water pipes that are part of the water line to bring waters to the homes. Sometimes it's pipes that are part of the sewage system that takes the sewage away from the home. So they're not actually very uncommon in Guatemala City. So this is 2007 and 2010 or yeah, this is 2010. Sorry. Another one formed in a very similar part of the city. In this case, it was 20 meters wide and about 30 meters deep. But the good news is nobody died in this particular one. What's really interesting is if you go and like look at these 2 locations on Google Earth, you'd never know it was there. Because they filled it in and covered it up, and now the streets are there again, which is pretty wild. This is an event that happened in 2011 that's actually kind of funny. There's a 65-year-old woman, Inocinta Hernandez, and she's chilling in her bed. All of a sudden, you hear this big, loud, like boom, like an explosion, and her and her family go running outside out of the apartment building, and they're like, they see their neighbors, and they were like, "What's that? What's that?" And everybody was like, "Hey, that was totally coming from your house." And they went inside, and first responders came, and everybody was looking all over the house, couldn't find anything, until finally someone moved her bed. And under her bed was this sinkhole that's 32 inches wide, but 40 feet deep. Turns out she was lucky she did not have a twin bed that was narrow enough to actually fall into that. So that's kind of one of the scariest stories where somebody came out alive from that, which is pretty neat. Here's some other ones that are famous too. This is called the Great Blue Hole in Belize. This particular sinkhole actually formed during the last ice age when the sea level was lower, so this was dry land, but limestone dry land, and it formed a sinkhole. But then as the glaciers melted and sea level rose, that seawater has filled up the sinkhole. That beautiful blue color is because of how deep it is. So apparently this is a really popular place for scuba diving and free diving because of just how deep it actually is under there, though. And then the Cave of the Swallows. This is kind of the image that I always had in my head of what a sinkhole looks like. You watch the base jumpers, you watch people rappel in there. You know, it's deep and it's narrow, and there's like, you can see there's things growing in it, and there's birds apparently. And the first time I went to Montezuma's well, the sinkhole up in the Verde Valley, I legit like walked in expecting it to look like this cave of swallows like this, and I was oddly disappointed when it was not big and deep that you could crawl in. But the fact that it's full of water is actually pretty amazing. And actually, in Montezuma's well, because it's limestone that's dissolving, it's a calcium carbonate, there's actually a lot of carbon dioxide in the water there, and there's some critters that only live in those really, really high carbon dioxide levels. So it's still kind of cool. All right, so limestone areas with a shallow water table are probably a bad idea in terms of real estate, and that counts the entire state of Florida.